So I want to talk about something that everybody's heard about. It's around us every single day. We are constantly inundated with supposed information about this topic and about all of the benefits and the wonders upon society which it's bestowed to us, and that is capitalism. And I know a lot of people identify as capitalists, and we've heard a lot of good things about it. But I would argue that most of the strongest supporters of capitalism don't even know what it is, and that's because the message put forward by captains of industry, by the writers of history, by the top level people on TV, who all tend to come from a certain wealthy class, let's call it the capitalist class, that message has been extremely one-sided and not very coherent. And so I wonder if you could think about what you think capitalism is, and I'll go ahead and make a straw man definition that I think the average layman in America might define as capitalism, which actually conflates it with something else entirely. And so the average person might say that capitalism is the process by which the average free-spirited capitalist seeks to increase his own wealth and status through producing goods and services, which is demanded by the population at large. And so you might see that people really want this new knickknack. And because there's a demand for that knickknack, there's a potential for him to make a profit off of it. And so he seeks investments so that he can build factories, so that he can build a bunch of those knickknacks, eventually pay off those investors or those investments, and then make a healthy profit for himself from the additional revenue generated from the knickknacks which he produced. And simultaneously, that benefits society because now the consumers which were demanding that product have increased their happiness and increased their marginal utility through being able to get this or that knickknack, this iPhone, this hatchet, this stopwatch, whatever it is, that makes them happier, and there's a equilibrium which is reached between the producers and the consumers, which ends up benefiting everybody, and it means that the concept of greed, or of seeking to increase your own wealth through your free-spirited entrepreneurship, actually is the engine by which society progresses. And so, Happy Day, being a greedy, a self-interested, greedy person, is actually what's the most American, most helpful thing of all. And so what I described just now was not actually capitalism, but that was a market. And so markets are things that have existed long before capitalism. There was markets in feudal societies. There was markets in slave societies. Markets have been around a long, long time. And so the presence or absence of a market is not what defined an economic system. What defines an economic system are the power relations between the parties within the economy. And so in slave societies, the masters dictated to the slaves, what's produced, how it's produced, how the wealth is distributed. In feudal societies, the lords dictated to the serfs what's produced, how much land they got, and then how the wealth for their production was distributed. And then in capitalist societies, the capitalist, or the capitalist class, which is made up of wealthy investors, the CEO, the board of directors, a small number of people at the top of business and the top of multinational corporations, get to dictate what's produced, where it's produced. Do we produce in Detroit, Michigan, or do we produce in Mexico or China? How it's produced, and then how the wealth is distributed. Do we pay minimum wage? Do we pay 50 cents an hour if we can outsource? Do we not pay anything if we can, automate this and have robots do it? Or do we pay our workers a living wage? And so that power dynamic between the decision makers, the capitalists, and the mass of people at the bottom, in this case the workers, is what defines capitalism and other economic systems. And so when capitalism first emerged in the 16th, 17th, 18th century Europe, 19th century North America, it was because a number of scientific as well as cultural inflection points had occurred which fundamentally changed the dynamics on the ground, which led to the emergence of capitalism. And so specifically what that meant was, as we emerged out of the Dark Ages, which were characterized by misery and suffering universally at a relatively constant level throughout time, as we emerged from that, due to the Enlightenment, due to new technologies emerging, that led to growth, and that led to society progressing and more things being able to be produced. And as we increased technologically, that led to more wealth being produced, which led to a positive view of the future, which meant that in the past, if you were a peasant with $100, what incentive did you have to give that to the peasant next door so that he could, get started on his bakery or whatever it is? In all likelihood, you'd better use that money now, because it's probably, if it's going to be anything, it's going to be worse tomorrow. And so lending, there was no incentive for. But now with the Enlightenment and with new technologies emerging, it is very likely that if you were to lend your money diligently, you could get a return on investment. Another factor in that was colonialism. As we sailed across the oceans and stole the gold from indigenous peoples around the world, it became a good investment to spend some money on wood and nails and sails to make a boat to fill up with gold to take away from the Native Americans, so that you could get some gold for the silver that you paid for the wood. And so there became, as the empires grew and as those technologies took shape, and as the predominant view that things were actually getting better, because for a certain subset of people in Europe they were objectively, we need to invest in the future. And so that's what characterized capitalism, is a belief that the future would be better than the present, and that belief leading to the money that you had today from the production of yesterday, rather than being held onto or just circled around for the next year's production, as in feudalism, was reinvested, or money taken from the projected money from the future being used to manufacture things today in the form of loans for expeditions or what have you, or plantations. That money then leading to future money, leading to economic growth, leading to further investment. That's what characterizes capitalism. And so just like slavery and feudalism had weaknesses as economic systems, which should be apparent to all of us, so does capitalism. But it's a lot less apparent, because when you only hear one side of the story and it's all positive propaganda from the capitalists themselves, who have an incentive of making people think that it's all working well, you don't get to hear the other side of the story. And that's not to say that there aren't benefits from it. I would say that if it can help liberate people vis-a-vis feudalism, that's a good thing. On the other hand, we shouldn't be overly happy with the situation that we're currently in just because it's a improvement upon the Dark Ages. And so the most obvious negative thing about capitalism is that it needs constant growth. And so if tomorrow, people or investors think that tomorrow is going to be as bad or worse than today, they have no incentive in investing things. And if they don't invest in things today, that means that for sure tomorrow is going to be worse. And if they think that other people aren't going to be investing things, they're definitely going to not invest. And if they're not investing, then or even if they're de-investing, that means that they're A, not creating jobs, or B, they might even be getting rid of some of their costs by taking down their current factories and cutting costs in that way, which lead to increased unemployment, which actually leads to decreased demand, which leads to further decreased investment, because as people become unemployed, they don't buy goods, and when they don't buy goods, people don't want to invest in the future. And so it becomes a vicious circle. This is what some of the critics of capitalism pointed out, people like Karl Marx, who accurately predicted that every 5 to 7 years there is in recession within capitalist economies. They're highly unstable systems, and that's the fundamental dynamic which leads to that. There's also the dynamic of the capitalist or the person investing in production wanting to cut costs constantly, meaning that they want to cut costs on their labor expenses, meaning that they want people to work as long of hours as possible, for as low of wages as possible. But again, the lower the wages, the smaller the demand, the less they're able to sell on the aggregate for the economy. So there are lots of problems with capitalism, and the most fundamental one, I think, for our society is that people don't know what it is.